Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, based on your time zone. Welcome in Salesforce Epics Hour. My name is Amit Chaudhary. I'm the founder of the Salesforce Epics Hour, and today we are going to talk about how to build artifact from the requirement. And we have a special guest, Carl, with us. And let me hand over Carl for his introduction.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carl Brundage. I'm a master architect at Otiseva, also a CPA MVP, and hold a few certifications. In the local area, I co-lead our Allentown, Pennsylvania developers group. So I'm excited to bring this topic to you today, where we can take a look at how we build artifacts and actually go through some exercises together. Anything else you want to add, Amit, or should I just jump right in?
Yeah, you can go ahead and start.
Okay. All right, so for today, our agenda, I'm going to just take a few minutes and speak to you about artifacts, what they are, why they're useful. And then we'll spend most of our time actually looking at a business scenario. So what I'll do is I'll share a scenario. You should have access to download it on your side. If you want to get a diagramming tool ready, you can try building your own things. But I'll read some of the requirements to you and kind of talk to you about, well, this is what I think from an architect perspective. And then there will be places where I'll ask you, okay, put in the chat, what do you think we should do here? What do you think this means? What should we put in our landscape, our object model? So while we won't necessarily speak interactively, there's a lot of opportunity for you to interact and put your input in. And usually what happens, we end up with a slightly different model than last time that I did this. And that's great because there's a lot of different viewpoints. And then I'll give you some tips and tricks at the end of things to think about. So the first place to start is the why. Why do we care about building these artifacts? And what it comes down to is the solutions, the diagrams that we build, they communicate the decisions. So if we think about all the things we have going in our heads as architects, we have to convey that out to other people. And what I like to use is an analogy for folks and say, well, if we think about the solar system, right? That's a very complex model. There's the sun, but how big is it? How far away are certain planets? So we build that model. I think back to school where we had the sun and the little wires where the different planets revolved around. But it took something really complex and abstracted it down into a way that we could understand it. And we do the similar thing from a technical perspective. It allows us to quickly and clearly articulate our point of view. It's a lot faster to scan a diagram than read a page of text. You might look at my picture on the right and kind of think about the solar system, and you can grab that and understand it quickly than all the text I have on the screen. And last but not least, we use artifacts to help derive a shared understanding. It's a tool that facilitates a discussion of what might be missing or incorrect. Somebody can look at something and say, oh, well, what about this system that I'm using for project management? I don't see that anywhere on there. And you uncover requirements that you might have otherwise missed by letting people talk about the picture. So if we think about artifacts, they can take a lot of different shapes and forms. We're going to focus on the first two today, the system landscape. And that's used to describe the systems of a solution and how they interact. When I first started out with Salesforce, I thought it was great. I'm like, every problem I have, I'm going to solve with Salesforce. Oh, you needed something to do X, Y, and Z. Let's build it in Salesforce. Let's build it in Salesforce. But as I got more experience, Salesforce isn't the solution to every problem. There's things that Salesforce is really, really good at. And frankly, there's some things that you don't want to use it. They're anti-patterns, things that you definitely shouldn't. So you end up having Salesforce be one piece of the picture and other things like ERP, custom systems, statistical systems that have to integrate with it. So the system landscape talks about that. It talks about all the systems and how information is going to flow between them. Likewise, we have an object model. And the object model is used to show the objects and the relationship of the solution. You may call it a data model in more traditional database systems. And this is really important because, frankly, the way we know our customers, the way that somebody interacts with a solution, it's through the data that's there. So that's important. If we think about other models, you may have a security or sharing model, something that describes the, the access controls for record sharing. A role hierarchy may fit into this, how different parts of the organization work together in order to access data. You can have things that describe your testing strategy, how you're going to validate various aspects of a solution. A branching strategy, if you're diving into some of the DevOps topics, how you support the project development with different environments in a sandbox strategy, or different ways that things flow together or branch through your source control. And there's so many more: business process diagrams, sequence diagrams, UML. So there's no shortage of ways that you can convey what you're thinking as a picture. So if we look at a couple examples, here's a very basic system landscape: block notation. You see arrows to talk about the flow between different systems. Here's Salesforce. We talk to an enterprise system bus. So that's one way of doing it. If you want to get very stylistic and like highlight different points, you can do that too. You can show, cute icons to denote different systems. Make sure they definitely have meaning. If you look at something like this, probably think text message. You probably think credit cards. Pen, I don't know, maybe signature, right? So just think about what you're building there. From an object model, again, a very, very simple one starting out that just talks about the objects and the relationships using different types of notations here. There's multiple ways to do this, whether you use crow's feet or one to many, one to n, that sort of thing. So lots of options there. And for today, we're going to actually build some things. So you can pick your favorite diagramming tool, whether you're on Windows, Mac, you want an online version. For me, I'm going to use Draw.io inside of a web browser, just because it's easy to present and share. I've done a lot of work with Lucidchart. It does come with a license, so it's not always free for folks. PowerPoint, Google Slides, usually not my preferred option. You can spend a lot of time messing with the lines and trying to get it out. Or if I'm in front of people and we're having a conversation, I'll jump to a whiteboard and go ahead and freehand and draw things for people as well too. So whatever way you want to work today. All right, so let's go ahead and look at the business requirements. I'm going to jump over to the scenario, and I'm going to spend some time talking through the first pieces of information and telling you what I think, and then I'll give you a chance to start interacting and help build out our solution. So the scenario we're going to use, it's a company called the Conference Company, TCC. They run the registration and logistics for business and technical conferences held at multiple venues. So these conferences attract over 2 million pre-registered attendees, and each conference has between 10 to 100 different businesses that sponsor the conference. And I know this may sound like background information, but this is really important to me as an architect when I see a short description about a company, because now I know, okay, what type of business are they in? So they're working and running logistics for conferences. So there's probably some sort of other business that they're working with. But because it's conferences, there's people coming, right? So we have businesses that we're probably going to have to work with, and consumers. Next thing, we know we have 2 million pre-registered attendees. So I'm already kind of clued into large data volumes. I mean, 2 million of itself isn't necessarily large, but what if people go to 10 conferences or some of those things? So I'm kind of on the lookout now to say, okay, where might we have large data volume? And the same thing between 10 to 100 different businesses. So not a lot of sponsors, probably not something to be concerned in there. With a growing customer base, the approaches that work when they're smaller are not scaling. A combination of email, chat tools, and spreadsheet means many manual processes and organizational efficiencies. So a line like that tells me, well, you know what? They have some pain points, and I want to be really cognizant of the pain that they've expressed in my solution and make sure that we identify really success factors for the project to say, well, what can we measure now that's not working? Is it time to respond to somebody? Is it how easy it is to communicate? How often, a customer doesn't convert into being a sponsor? Like metrics around there, so we can say, this is your current state, and when the future state is in place, we've been successful. It wants to eliminate challenges running on spreadsheets. Information should be entered and tracked in a single location. And then with a changing business climate, they've seen significant increase of online virtual conferences and expects attendance to grow 20% over the next 3 years. A lot of times I get the question of, well, how far in the future should I think about things when I'm working with a customer? And if they give you a time horizon like this, where they're like, we're going to grow over the next 3 years, that's a good time frame to think about, to say, okay, I'm going to build a solution that works today, but it also needs to scale and be usable for the next 3 years. Someone may ask, well, why not go longer? Why not go 5 years? Why not go 7 years? The problem is you don't always know what business is going to be like that far down the road, right? So you can spend a lot of time playing the what if game and not have accurate assumptions. So from the standpoint of, if you were to try and predict 5 to 7 years, what if in year 6 they bought a large competitor and doubled in size, right? That's just not foreseeable. So you try and ground in a time horizon of what the customer talks about, or if not, I typically use 3 years or 5 years at the most. So given this first kind of overview, knowing that there's manual processes, they want to eliminate this, what type of system should we put in our landscape to do that? And this is where you can chat in or put things in the chat, and I'll kind of respond to what's there and build out the system landscape. And it's not a trick. Remember, we're at a Salesforce event. So communities, okay. I think you're reading ahead, but I will come to some requirements I think there. Okay, so sales. Yeah, so we can take Salesforce and put that on our system landscape. And there may be places that we have some sales components because we talked about working with businesses. There may be some components to service where we need to support people. And there may be some components of, well, how do we let people register and work in this conference, communities? So this is great that we already, just from a short, couple paragraphs, we're already thinking about how different solutions can fit it. So where I typically go next is I'll focus in on the users. So this will help us understand what are the personas that we're building for and how do we want to model those. So we can take each group as its own. So account managers, they work with businesses to set up conference sponsorship. So these are the folks that are convincing you to give them money to sponsor the particular event. What type of use case would we see for those? Like what do we think in Salesforce they would use based off of that short description? Opportunities. Okay, so if they're using opportunities, what type of license? All right, so we should give them a Sales Cloud license. So let me grab a little persona for Sales Cloud. And we said something about opportunities. So let's actually take and let's put an opportunity object out here. So I'll just grab one of my objects, rename it opportunity, maybe. So from here, as we're reading through, we're seeing two things, right? We're seeing systems that we want to put on our landscape, and then we see objects that we want to use in the object model. All right, meeting planners. They design the conference plans and coordinate the logistics. So what do we think about those? Campaign. Well, what other ideas? Custom object, events. So I would say case, service appointment, calendar, like we're all over the place, right? Maybe we don't know yet. Maybe we don't know exactly what the best thing for them is until we go through the rest of the scenario, but we know that we're going to have them. So what we can do is we can leave them out there. We know these people will be on sales because they are the account managers. But these meeting planners, let's just give them a question mark, and we can come back when we know a little bit more of the requirements of what they're going to be doing to say where they should be, because sometimes it's not always obvious when you first start. All right, customer support agents provide support to individual attendees. So what do we think about those? All right, so a case. So we'll put a case on our object model. So service, yeah, I'm leaning towards service. It doesn't necessarily say that we have something that necessarily requires service yet, because Service Cloud, access to the case, that could be available in just in Sales Cloud. But we'll look for some other requirements that definitely support that. There's a question about how are we getting these elements. So this is just a library that I've created for myself of these particular elements to make it go faster today. So what happens is as you build out different landscapes and object models, you can take and you can add them to the Scratchpad, or you can save and create your own library so it's easier to come back and use again. All right, sponsors. So sponsors are businesses that pay for advertising or promotion at the conference. So now we've gone from internal users to thinking about some of the external users. How do we want those external users to interact with us? So we are seeing like a partner community. So coming in from the outside. Okay, so let's add those sponsors on here. And I'm also hearing, okay, we need some accounts. So we're going to model those as business counts. And yes, I'm using Draw.io. So the question in here. And yeah, you need accounts for partner communities anyways. And in fact, in addition to accounts, what else would we need? Contacts, right? So for the access to a community, you're going to have some type of contact record. So I'm gonna go back. I know somebody said person accounts, but hold that till the next one, right? Because now we're talking about attendees, people that register for the conference. So you and me that are going to go to a particular conference. So we'll add them onto our object model as well. Excuse me, onto our landscape as well. And that's where we can say, yeah, you know what? That might make sense to have them as person accounts. So then I get a question, well, if you're dealing with person accounts, how do you show that? And typically what I'll do is I'll grab something like this and I will put accounts and contacts together and I'll call it person accounts. And we might push that down to the bottom and then send it to the back. So we kind of have a little container that we can use later to say, okay, this is where I have person accounts versus regular accounts. All right, and I'm seeing some other good ideas in there that I saw some things about leads. What else did I see? Service, omni-channel. So we'll come back to those. They may definitely come in and be used as part of our solution. But right now, just talking about, okay, we're going to have these users. We don't know the exact requirements, right? We don't want to over-engineer something. So we're going to go through some of the systems and then some of the business processes to really flesh out the requirements and the objects that we need. All right, from a systems perspective, we use a couple of existing systems. So a SQL Server-based custom logistics app to manage the conference details. And this system supports single sign-on. All right, so we think about the logistics system. We're gonna have some type of logistics system. It's SQL Server based, so it's probably sitting on our premises somewhere. And what we wanna do is we want to think about like how do we want this to work? Is this a system that is gonna stay with us? Or is this a system that we're gonna wanna retire? And we might not have perfect information yet, but if I think about it, it's something custom. We may end up leaving this, right? This may not be something that we try and rebuild inside of Salesforce. So you kind of have a decision, all right? If it's a logistics, how do we want to make that functionality work? We could look at external objects with Salesforce Connect, absolutely. That would give us read-write capabilities. But we may end up deciding that we have other information that it's processing, right? And being able to just view something isn't sufficient. So we know that we're going to have the system. Seems like we're probably going to keep it right now. Don't know all the requirements to say exactly how to solution it inside Salesforce. So we put it on our landscape and then we'll come back as we go through. And yes, we'll say that there's an API for it. All right, a third-party payment gateway for credit card processing that supports REST. So payment gateways and credit cards, that's one of those like red flags for me as an architect. I immediately see that. I'm like, okay, how can we keep this outside of Salesforce? I don't want to put credit card information inside of Salesforce. Is it PCI compliant? Yes, but we really don't want to have that information in there. So to me, you're going to keep the payment gateway, right? And there's different ways to integrate. But typically, what have people seen? If you hear payments and credit cards, what do you put inside of Salesforce so that you still can work with that other system? Like, what type of approach do we use? Okay, so ESB, I'm not sure what R&R is. Foreign unique IDs. So foreign unique IDs is getting close. And then there, tokenization. Yeah. So usually that's what you end up doing, right? It's about, in Salesforce, you have a token that represents what it needs to represent in the payment system. So you know for each account, you know from each person, this is the token that represents their information in the payments. So you may be doing payments in real time. You may have, in our case, maybe you want to keep a credit card on file because as an attendee because you're going to go to multiple conferences. We're not talking about subscriptions here, but oftentimes you can get into payments with subscriptions where you have that fees coming on a regular basis. Cool. All right, and then last but not least, an on-premise LDAP to authenticate employees and sponsors. So we definitely want to add that to our model. Put it in there. Okay, so Charlie said IDP. Well, why is that important? Well, if we think about it, LDAP, that's just a credential store, right? That doesn't help us do any type of authentication into Salesforce. So when we start seeing something along those lines, we're going to want to add another option in here. And I didn't say what that LDAP system was. You know, if it was Active Directory, yes, you could do Active Directory Federation. If it's something else, maybe you end up as was mentioned, using Okta or Ping as an identity provider. So we'll add our identity provider on here too. So our landscape, you know, it's starting to take shape. You know, just from the first few things, we have maybe a dozen different pieces out here ready to go. So now let's go through some of the business requirements and see what else we think we need to add. All right, so we're going to start with the meeting planners. They access the logistics app to create a new conference and make it available for potential sponsors and attendees to see. So that's kind of a strong requirement that says maybe the logistics system will stay there. But what do we think? What else would we draw out of this to use in our system? I'm thinking more objects than necessarily systems right now. All right, so users to avoid swivel chair. Okay, so yeah, we definitely want to have them access it in Salesforce, but perhaps it's a connected app, right? And we launch right into it because we said it does support single sign-on. So you wouldn't have to go between two systems, you could jump in. So I've heard campaigns. Let's throw that on there for now. Ah, a conference object. Okay. Oops, sorry. Do we need a calendar? I think we can probably get away without it. I didn't write a requirement that's specifically for that. But what we'll do is we'll grab a conference because we know people are going to go to conferences. And what do we know about conferences? Is a conference, you know, just one conference? Well, we'll leave it at conference right now. We'll come back to it. Potential and current sponsors can review avail conferences and indicate sponsorship interest. So the good news is we talked about already giving an opportunity in order for people to say, hey, I'm interested in sponsoring that conference. Okay, so I'm already seeing some thoughts about the security model. So public read on conferences. Leads, let me come back to leads in a second. But yeah, conferences have start dates, end dates, sponsors, attendees, exhibitors. So good. All right, AMs are assigned sponsorship interest requests based off a geographic location. So we had the concept of leads that represent the interest. So then how do we get these leads to the right person? Yeah, lead assignment. So there's places even in here where we can start thinking about functional requirements or functional solutions that don't even involve your landscape or object model, but definitely play into it. All right, so the AMs review sponsorship interest. So they're going to review that lead and communicate with qualified partners. I did see somebody mention Chatter before, so maybe you were thinking about that. But yeah, you could definitely set up Chatter, or you could set up email quick actions in order to do that type of communication. And then sponsors can review available options and prices and create a custom sponsorship package. So for example, it may be $5,000 for a coffee break where keynote features 25,000. So we think about it, the people that want to sponsor, they're looking at different options, they're putting it together, and then they're saying, this is what I'm interested in. Okay, so CPQ, yes, but we only have 30 minutes left, so that's a little bit of overkill. I'm going to stick with the standard opportunities. Yeah, price book. Okay, so this is interesting. People think opportunities first, which is good. Now I'm seeing opportunity products, right, to represent the different options. And what I like is that folks are bringing in the other objects. A lot of times it's easy to miss things like, oh, you know what? I need price book, I need products, and then I need one more thing to go with it. What do I need to go with it? Price book entries, yes. So that's an easy one to overlook, because if we start thinking about how our object model works, it's not just a product that you put, even though you pick it, it ends up with a price book entry. So there's places where we need to know the object model under the hood of Salesforce, because it gets a little bit weird. Awesome. All right, multi-currency, we're going to keep it just single currency for now to keep it simple. But yeah, it definitely could be in play. And then AM send customized documents to the sponsors for signatures. So what are we thinking about that? You have something created. Okay, so I'm seeing lots and lots of suggestions: DocuSign, eSign, Conga, S-Sign. Well, what are all those? We can represent those by coming back and saying, you know what? We need some type of e-signature, and we might even want some type of document prep that goes with it. So we're going to get those items from the App Exchange. What about the object model? Is there anything else we want to add here? So we have our opportunity, we have our opportunity product. So the document, yeah, we could model out content document link. Oh, contract. I like that idea. I like the idea of having something that says, okay, we're going to create a formal agreement that you're sponsoring it. This is the cost and this is what you're going to get. And then we send that contract out for signature. So that's kind of one of the things that I was thinking at from that perspective. Awesome. From a license type, let's go back and let's talk about these sponsors. What do we think? We said that they're going to use a community, but what type of community do we want them to use? Okay, why partner community? Oh, I saw a customer. Okay, so we have some different. We have customer plus, and partner. So we got all of them. Okay, access to opportunities. Yeah, so if we think about the different slices of communities, there's some key differences. Partner has leads and opportunities and campaigns. Customer plus doesn't. So that's one of the big distinctions. And then when you start looking at volume, you get to customer, there's a lot of other things it doesn't have access to. It's not going to run reports. It's not going to have Einstein Analytics, but you can support tens of millions of users in a customer community. So I would say, yep, sponsors are definitely ending up in a partner community. Cool. Not that I can type today. All right. So conference registration. Potential attendees can view conferences and sessions from both desktop and mobile devices. So that's us. So right away, we know that we have millions of them. We said that they're in a community. I think we can decide right now what type of community do we want to put them in. Customer or customer plus. All right, so I'm seeing a lot of votes for customer. I would think that they are going to be customer too. Maybe we come back and revisit, but I don't see them needing to access the leads and the opportunities. They need to talk about what conferences they want to come to, and they want to see what conferences and sessions. So what else do we need to add here for our object model? Sessions, yes, we need to be able to model that so folks can see the sessions that they want to use. Okay, so junction, what are we thinking about as a junction object? What do we want to put together? Ooh, session attendees. I like that. Jumping ahead. So we're saying, yes, you know what? that person, they're going to pick a session, so they need to participate there. I think there's also one more thing I would add in here as well from a junction perspective. So we have a person going to multiple sessions, but what may they want to go? We're going to ignore speakers. Nobody's going to speak at our conferences. It's all pre-recorded. So we'll come back to the check-in, the registration. So what are we thinking about registration, right? We have to somehow say, these people are going to this conference. And guess what? We're allowed to go to multiple conferences. So I think that's where you have another junction object that is your conference attendee. So we might put that on there as well too. Yeah, so conference attendee, they're going to this conference, sessions, and attendees. Okay, so after registering, attendees can pay with a credit card and view the receipt. So we already handled the payment gateway. We said we're going to put that on our object model, or excuse me, on our system landscape. Now we need to make sure that they can see the receipt. How are we going to do that? All right, let's add a payment in there. So we'll say for this conference, you paid, that has the necessary information so that you can look at a receipt. Awesome. Before the conference, attendees can go opt in to receive personalized emails and texts about their conference and the sections that they selected. It doesn't necessarily sound like an object to me. It sounds like we need some type of functionality here on our landscape. So what would we add? Email alert. So that could handle part of it. What about the text? Journey builder. So we're moving into some type of marketing solution. All right, let's take and let's add that, because you know what, now Salesforce is so big, I don't always know what it means to say you're using Salesforce. So I might start calling out subclouds to say, you know what, we have Marketing Cloud as part of this solution inside of Salesforce because we want them to do that. Yeah, it could be live message. So what used to be live message, it could be an external solution. It doesn't have to be Salesforce. That maybe they already have a solution in place. But you have to think about, yep, email is going to be outside of Salesforce, right? Because you have your mass email limits. You're not going to be able to email millions of people every day. Pardot, well, if I'm going to do a marketing automation with Pardot, I probably wouldn't do that because it's not going to give me the text messages. I don't necessarily want to fragment my communication across different systems. I would probably pick one that combines everything like Marketing Cloud. But yeah, if you want to just do it all on platform, you could use a Twilio, you could use the digital engagement, aka live messages, how I knew it. So those sort of options are available. All right, and then MPs need to access conference and session attendance in the logistics app to plan if additional sessions are needed. So that earlier options where we said, hey, what do we need to do? Do we need to let them access it? Do we need to do single sign-on? Do we need to do Canvas? Really thinking about those things, but there's data that needs to flow back and forth. All right, this takes us to conference events. So attendees need to be able to submit a request for help when at the conference. And I know we already put case on there, so I think we're covered there. They want to be able to use their mobile app to automatically check in for a session based off of their geographic location. So we want to geofence this thing. You know, we're tired of coming up and saying, hey, here's my badge, scan me in. So how do we want to do that? We're going to need some way to hold this information, right? So where do we think we're going to hold it? Okay, so Heroku. So let's jump to the landscape. So we're going to need some type of system in place that can put this. And I like that you're already thinking, all right, check-in information. That's probably big. We don't want to put that inside of Salesforce. So we're going to put it externally. From an object model perspective, what do we think? So something to hold it. Check-in. How about a check-in object? So something that says, for this session, this attendee checked in. All right. So I don't see it as part of registration. So if I say I want to go to Dreamforce, I'm going to be a conference attendee. I'm going to say I'm going to go to Dreamforce. I pay for Dreamforce. Dreamforce has all these sessions. I'm going to sign up for these sessions. But then the check-in is, when I go to that particular session, who attended, who didn't, maybe some other information when they came in, all that sort of information. If we think about it, going in, coming out, if you leave the room early, you may have multiple instances of checking in and checking out. So if it was just kind of a flag on session attendee, yes, no, I could see that. But the fact that we're kind of capturing all this mobile information, might want to have it as a different object. All right. Sponsors can view the conference information, ROI, so what they performed. I think to me, we already talked about having the landscape in there of keeping this information keeping the sponsors in a partner community so that they can run reports. So I think that's another good reason why we would put that. All right, data from existing spreadsheets should be loaded into the new system. Those spreadsheets contain duplicate and similar data. So one thing I think is important, what do we want to add here? Well, we probably want to show that we are coming from some sort of existing system. And what we can do is we can show that that's going to be retired as part of our solution. And yeah, I like the fact that folks are already thinking, all right, we need to find a way to get that in there. So let's put some type of ETL. I think we heard some type of ESB for our logistics solution. So we're starting to get a kind of more complete system landscape. If we think about the next requirement, TCC is concerned about the learning curve of working with a new system and like a recommendation for protecting data from accidental user or process error that deletes or overwrites records. So again, this is probably a place where we can go back to the App Exchange and use something that protects your data. So, I would be remiss if I didn't say, own backup, or our case, Odaseva, that we use this. But the idea is there's solutions out there that will help protect your data because you are responsible for what lives inside your Salesforce, or your users make a mistake, somebody deletes something, you're the ones for bringing it back. All right, security requirements. So last set of items. Users don't want to remember another username and password and should use existing network credentials to access the apps. So we got our LDP, we got our SSO, our identity provider. So I think we're good there. Attendees should be able to register and log in with their existing Facebook or Google accounts. So what do we need to add here? So social sign-on. Yeah, so what I would do is I would show the different providers that we're going to work with. And then TCC would like a recommendation for how to store sensitive information such as credit cards and access limits. Well, we kept it off platform, but we need to think about some security. So this is going to add to our security model that we build out. And then seeing sponsors in their geographic territory. So data masking will protect you in a sandbox, but you're not going to use that inside of a production org. Shield platform encryption. So Shield platform encryption, if you think about it, it's meant to keep Salesforce from seeing your data because the data is encrypted at rest. It doesn't prevent users from seeing the data. As soon as you log in, you see everything that you have access to. So Shield doesn't stop users from seeing information. It only prevents Salesforce employees from seeing it. So we're going to think about some security and some ownership. And then last but not least, able to modify conferences they are managing. Again, some requirements that talk about security. So if I look at this object model, or excuse me, the system landscape, I think it's looking pretty good. There's one more system that I would probably add. And it's something that is often overlooked, and it's just based off of the different requirements we have. Anybody think of what the system might be? Data warehouse, perhaps. I think what we're actually going to do is we're going to still use Tableau CRM for some of the analytics. We got the ERP, we got the payment. So it involves these attendees and what they're using when they're on site at the conference. Mobile, yeah. So sometimes we forget about, there's a use for this device in our system landscape. So we need to make sure that we get those devices because we have to authenticate, we have to identify them. They're definitely part of it. From an object model perspective, Let's see if there's anything that I think is missing. Got that, got that. Opportunities, price book. I think we're pretty good. So okay, what's the difference between conference attendee and session attendee? Is it really necessary? So conference attendee, if you think about if you've attended Dreamforce, if you've attended Trailhead DX, right, 6 months before the conference comes, you go and say, yep, I want to attend, here's my credit card. That registers you for the conference, but you have no idea what the sessions are. You don't know if I'm speaking, if Amit's speaking, Peter Coffey's speaking, any of those things. So once those sessions start coming out, we have that crazy day for Dreamforce where registration opens and everybody goes in fast and tries to get the sessions that they want. That's where session attendee would be held to say that, okay, first I'm going to the conference, so I'm a conference attendee, and now from that conference, I'm picking the sessions. All right, why did I pick Heroku? We picked Heroku based off of the mobile check-in and the geofencing, right? Because if you think about when you're looking at somewhere, when you're involving geofencing, you're working with devices, you only want to check the person in when they hit inside of the geofence, but you're going to get pings from their devices all throughout, the Moscone Center, if you think about that. So you're going to have a lot of this mobile data coming in, but you only want to use a subsegment of it for the check-ins. So because of the volume and the size of that mobile data, that's not something that you're going to want to try and store on platform. So you can use Heroku to handle the processing and put it into a Postgres database or wherever. For this exercise, I don't care where it's stored, but knowing that it's too big to hold in Salesforce. All right, did I miss any other questions? Okay, now let's look at kind of the steps to make these diagrams better. I think we have a good start. We're missing something really important here. We're also missing some things really important here. So let's talk about how we go through and we build this out. All right, so the system landscape, I start with the Salesforce-centric viewpoint, and I'm adding in kind of the systems that we talked about. And you noticed even when I did it, I was kind of all over the place, right? Like, why was I putting these things in crazy places when you were calling them out? It's my diagramming style. Every diagram you see me build is going to have this format. Salesforce in the middle, it's going to have on-premise on the right, it's going to have authentication at the bottom, it's going to have users at the bottom, App Exchange is at the top, other cloud system is the top right, and then authentication social is on the bottom left. I do this for like mental load, right? Like every time I look at my diagrams from customer to customer, from project to project, I know where everything's supposed to be. And I know if I look in a particular place and I don't see something, is it intentional or did we miss something? Did we miss the authentication? So it helps me have some muscle memory of, do I have what I need in a particular place or not? So then the next thing we look at is, all right, how can we add additional detail? We put that current system on there, but we probably want to cross it off to show that it's leaving. I saw somebody mention firewall. So firewall is helpful to kind of put that visual indicator of this is actually on premise versus this is all residing in the cloud. We can do things to help identify different types of items that live together. So we're going to get these things from the App Exchange. We're going to use these social sign-on providers. You saw us add the users, but you may call them out specifically and say, hey, these are the internal users, these are the external. I really like including the licenses of how they're accessing Salesforce, because if you start talking about functionality, you're like, oh yeah, these meeting platform or these meeting planners that are a platform user, we're going to have them, review the opportunities as they come in, and then you go, oh, wait, if they're platform, they're not going to have access to opportunities. Let's explore that more. So it kind of puts it front and center because licenses are so crucial to what you can actually do on Salesforce. I start calling out the other Salesforce clouds that we're going to use because it's become so huge now, right? Are we using Tableau? Well, that's part of Salesforce, right? Well, Tableau CRM, that's a subset. So it just helps facilitate the communications of what's going on. So what did we miss? What did we miss with our system landscape? One really important thing. We showed the systems, but we didn't show arrows. Well, what are the arrows? The arrows are, yeah, the interactions. How do these systems behave together? And sometimes it can be daunting to think about it, but I kind of go back to the requirements and say, okay, how are we going to do this? We have an empty Salesforce system. So we're going to start by loading things in from the ETL from the current system. We know that we then need to have users authenticate. So they're probably coming in through the LDAP. They're going to go and set up conferences with the logistics app. We're going to have our external users come in now. Our partners are going to start reviewing things. We need to send them documents to sign, so e-signature, so there's some back and forth there. Our attendees start signing in socially. They need to get into the systems. They're going to make their payments. And then finally, they come on site and they start interacting with the solution. And then you have things like the backup and restore that's protecting the whole time back and forth. Why is IDP connected to external users? We had a requirement that the accounts, the sponsors were going to use, on-premise LDAP to authenticate employees and sponsors. So they were putting it in as into their Active Directory as guest users. So it just depends on your requirements. You might not have had that requirement. And then there was a question about mobile. Yeah, I probably should move mobile over. I was kind of showing it goes through the mobile, but absolutely. All right. Depending upon the audience that you're working in, you can go a step closer or a step deeper and start talking about, well, what are the protocols? You might not use this for a business audience, but it could be very helpful if you start talking technical or you want to work with developers or integration specialists. So you can say, hey, we're going to integrate with Bulk. We're going to use SAML when we start authenticating. The logistics app is going to talk through SOAP. The App Exchange apps are going to talk through SOAP. We know we're using OpenID Connect. The payment gateway may have REST. Heroku can talk through REST and the arrows that I missed. So the idea is you can use different layers on your diagrams based off the audience that you're talking to add more detail to facilitate the conversation or to take it away. So I've done this a lot with Lucidchart where I've actually added a layer and then I can kind of turn it on or turn it off. So the content is there based off of who I'm talking with. All right, what are the justifications to use systems for backup and restore since Heroku is in there? So Heroku Connect, so if we think about something like Heroku Connect is going to take the data from Salesforce. You're going to live in your Heroku database, but it's syncing, right? So what happens if you delete something from Salesforce? Well, you're going to delete it from Heroku. If you somehow still had it in Heroku, how do you get it back into Salesforce, right? So that's what our solutions, other ones that are out there in the market are meant to do, is to say, look, we have a copy of your data, it's protected, you delete something, you update something from Salesforce, you can get it back and restore it to the way that we want. During the review board, do we need to be specific on which ETL? Not necessarily. Just know that if you start talking about a particular solution, you say, hey, we're going to use MuleSoft, then I'm going to probably ask you specific questions about MuleSoft. Well, how do we authenticate in MuleSoft so that we have security on both sides, right? So those type of things come into play. All right. I think we are good from a system landscape. Let's take a look at our object model. So the main thing we did for an object model, we didn't draw any arrows. So I put some arrows on here to show the objects and how they connect. But when we're talking about an object model, we don't want to actually use arrows. We need to change and we need to use cardinality. And it's really important to talk about, well, how do these objects relate? In this case, yeah, a business account, they can sponsor multiple conferences. A person can go to multiple conferences and multiple sessions. And again, you can use crow's feet notation. You can use the one in the infinity sign or one to N or one to M and to N, whatever way you want to use. Again, have a style and stick with it. Oops, we lost some of the visuals here. from a relationship cardinality perspective, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we have things in place. So let me just grab a different slide deck that has the pictures. See if this works. Okay, it does not. Let me try one more thing. Nope. All right. So you're going to get my view because they actually are showing in my view. So I'm just going to keep it in design mode and we'll just run with it. All right, the next thing we can do, you notice as I was putting objects out there, they were actually coming with different colors. And that was intentional. You know, I wasn't just trying to do that to make it look different. I was actually showing the different types of objects. Blue were standard, green were custom. I had some external objects. I even had some big objects. And I don't care, you know, you can use shapes instead of colors. Make sure you have a legend, make sure you have some type of indicator. I think about color blindness. I may not pick great colors here, but those type of things all play into, hey, it's much easier to pick out what are the custom, what are the standard objects if you use some type of notation like this. Next thing we can do is we can overlay the security model. So we can start thinking about, all right, we saw things like these need to be private. We don't want people to see other businesses. We don't want folks to see the payment. So what I'll often add is I'll often add the org-wide default for a particular object. So we can say, you know, accounts are private, but we want everybody to see the conferences. So they're public read only. We know only meeting planners can respond to them. The other thing that's important is because we're dealing with Salesforce, we layer in things like, is it a lookup or is it a master detail? Because that has a big effect on your security model. You know, if I make something like session a master detail to conference, well, you know what? I'm not going to be able to share that separately. I'm going to have inheritance from the parent, and it's controlled by the parent. So there's not an owner. Because you can see all the conferences, you can see all the sessions. So in this case, you know, I'm okay with that. Here, you know what? This may not be right. You know what? I don't want to have a session attendees be visible by everyone. We need to hide it. Or maybe you do. I've been in conferences or events through my college where they list all the people that are going in there. So it facilitates that discussion to say, you know what, that's not how we want to have this. This needs to be a lookup because we need to secure this separately. So those things can inform some discussions and come up with the right design decision. And then I saw the question about, do we specify owner, volume, LDV? So we talked about owner. The last thing is absolutely, I think you need to have some type of indication of data volumes. And again, you're not looking for exact numbers here. You're not trying to say it's 1,317. You need to get the order of magnitude, right? You know, we have 1,000 accounts that we're sponsoring. We have 2 million attendees. So what does that mean? Well, if there's 1,000, maybe there's 1,000 opportunities or 5,000 opportunities. You know, something like conference attendees, we're going to have 10. We're having 100 conferences, 10,000 sessions. So we have 5 million session attendees. That's something now that I'm like already thinking, all right, how do we mitigate this LDV? What type of ways are we going to load this data? How are we going to query? How are we going to report off of it? How are we going to use list view? So there's a lot of things like that that come into play. Do you have to put it for all objects? I like to. The reason I like to is how do you know how much is in that object if you don't put it there? You know, you're kind of making an assumption that everybody agrees to that and we're just not going to put it. So by this, I kind of bring it out front, and I don't make that implicit assumption. I'm making a stated assumption, and somebody can challenge me on it. Somebody from the business can say, well, wait, why, you know, why are you using this? Now, as I mentioned, you do have to have the conversation and say, look, we're not holding you to the exact number. We want to get the order of magnitude, right? Like, oh, you think you're going to have 10,000 different things that you're selling. That's important to know instead of my assumption of 100. Sometimes folks get a little caught up in like, well, I don't know exactly how many accounts I'm going to have a year from now. We have 3,719 right now. And like, well, no, that's okay. Like, let's think, how much did you have a year ago? How much? Okay, so you're growing 10%. Are you planning to acquire somebody? Are you going to have something that drastically changes that? And usually they can answer those type of questions to get you to the right ballpark. And yeah, a magnitude is, I think, enough, unless you're getting something specific, right? Like, hey, we're gonna have 2 million people come to our conferences, and we expect everyone to enter 3 cases per person, and we're going to do this for 3 years. Well, then you need to take 2 times 3 times 36, and you come up with that. So those are the things that are coming into play. So why did you use custom objects to hold conferences instead of campaigns? Well, if I did it as a campaign, a customer community user wouldn't be able to come in. So to me, a campaign is not really a conference. It's the typical kind of campaign marketing type thing, where this is something that you want to have people come to. All right. So what we did here in putting these together, we read some requirements, we thought about what the solutions were, we built diagrams, and then we talked about the steps that you can use to add a lot of density to your diagram. So you can make your pictures worth 1,000 words. So it's easy for somebody to look at that, think about things, and be able to have a conversation with you. So I think we have a couple minutes left if there's any specific questions. So Amit, happy to take a couple minutes and answer anything particular that comes up.
Thank you, Carl. So guys, if you have any question, let me allow you to unmute yourself and ask the question directly with the Carl. So if you have a question, unmute yourself and ask the question.
Yes, this is Charlie. Carl, thank you for the presentation. It's wonderful. I have a question. In our system landscape, you said name the protocols. So if we name the protocols, that definitely helps with the security aspect. For example, two-way SSL. How thoroughly should we do that?
What was the last part? What should we do that?
How thoroughly? I mean, do we label every connection? Do we label HTTPS and then two-way SSL? All of those things?
Only if you think it's really important to call out. From my perspective, there's a different way of thinking if you're using the bulk API or if you're using SAML. So I don't use this if I'm talking necessarily to a business audience, but if I think, okay, now we're kind of going to get into the technical details and we need to think about how are we going to build this out. Okay, well, it's SOAP, so now you need to be dealing with XML. That's kind of where I use it at that next technical level where you're starting to build things out.
Okay, you give a great example, like SOAP versus REST. Do we label that on the diagram, at least in the CTA board, or we do not need that level of detail?
For the review board, I did it because I wanted to use it to talk through my flows and how we were using it, because the protocol that you're going to interact with is important. But if you're not going to label it, you should definitely talk to it when you go through your requirements.
Gotcha. May I ask one more question?
Sure.
Okay, so people told me that nowadays the scenario may have hidden integrations. They did not specifically ask for that, but you have a ERP, you have Salesforce, you need to sync up the accounts, and you have a product master, you have a website which show product, there's a sync up from the product master to both the website and the Salesforce. Do we identify those integrations, or we?
Well, I think we had hidden requirements today, which is just like life, right? Nobody really goes and says, here's a section of all of our systems and exactly what they do. They start saying we have these things, but then, we expect our users to access it, and we didn't put the mobile device on, right? So we found the mobile device. Or they said, hey, I'm worried about data being protected and us making mistakes in this new system, and that brings in an app exchange app that does data protection for you. So yeah, you're always going to find needs that are not just, hey, we have this system, and then you have to think about, well, do we build it, do we buy it, is it native? So that's where I would say, yes, you're always going to have other requirements that may lead to another system on your landscape.
Thank you, Carl.
All right, I can take one more question, I think, Amit.
Yep. One last question, guys.
Uh, Call, it's Baba Rayan here. It was really good one. Call, how do you expect to give us the timelines and explaining the business users about the estimates here? You have any idea?
So how do you turn this work into what's a project going to take? Is that the question? Like the estimating
Yeah,
side?
yeah, the
Yeah,
estimates. The business users are always, we need it in a month, in a 2 months, and it's like difficult for them to show this diagram and ask them
sure.
like there are multiple things. How do we convey them?
So to me, it's one of the things I don't really believe in is I don't believe in agile architecture from the standpoint of like, hey, let's just start a project with a sprint and we're going to do a sprint 0 and we'll figure this stuff out and we'll just build. Like, I think there's sufficient work up front that is necessary to come up with this overall architecture. And from there, then it becomes, this is the end state picture. We're not going to get you there right now. We understand you have some burning needs that you want to have first. Let's identify what's that minimally viable product or what's that most important thing, so that you don't turn it into this giant project. You then move into that agile approach where you can say, all right, we think we want to have the ability for sponsors to come in and be able to do the signatures. Like that's our top priority. Okay, well then, we can leave Heroku out. We can leave social sign-on. We can leave it. So you can start crossing things out from the first phase, knowing that you'll need them later, but then you kind of are able to build in that functionality and go faster. So it's not exactly like, hey, this means it's a week or a month, but it's kind of a conversation to understand what's important and then be able to do the smaller scope on the accelerated timeline.
Yeah. Thanks,
Oh, my pleasure.